The morning arrived with an almost deceptive softness, painting the sky over Machynlleth with the subdued colors of early autumn. A gentle chill lingered in the air, hinting that summer's warmth was gone for good, replaced by the crispness of a Welsh October day. Rays of sunlight slowly crept through the narrow streets, illuminating rows of modest homes and silent gardens still damp with dew. It was a day that began like any other, a day that gave little warning of the turmoil it would carry in its final hours. April Jones started her morning in the same unassuming way she had so many times before. From a distance, one could observe the household waking up to the typical hum of activity. Neighbors began their routines, setting off to work or tending to chores. School-time bustle was replaced by a day of relaxation for some. Yet for April, there was a sense of innocent excitement about the hours ahead, an anticipation that only childhood can bring. Though the rest of the world continued at its normal pace, there was an undercurrent of quiet happiness in the way she moved, as if each step was a small dance of joy. Outside, a thin mist drifted over the rolling hills, creating a scenic backdrop that seemed almost cinematic. Occasional birdsong broke the stillness, while far-off sounds of cars on the main road provided a steady, distant pulse. If anyone paused to take it all in, they would have seen a postcard-like moment. A quaint Welsh town coming to life under a cloak of soft, golden light. In that tranquil atmosphere, April's morning was filled with ordinary tasks and small delights. Perhaps a quick breakfast was prepared, something simple and comforting. One might picture the subtle clink of a spoon against a bowl, or the shuffle of feet across a kitchen floor. No hurried conversation, no rush out the door, just the mundane rituals that families everywhere share. From an outsider's perspective, it was the definition of security. A child in her safe haven, surrounded by familiar walls and the watchful care of loved ones. Soon, the routine expanded beyond the front door. The day stretched out in front of her, full of possibilities. The sun gained strength, illuminating the sidewalks and making shadows shorter. In that early light, Machynlleth's landscape seemed alive with color, a lush palette of greens in the surrounding hills and a pastel sky overhead. April, being 5 years old, had her own brand of curiosity. Everything was a small discovery, from the texture of wet grass under her shoes to the rustling leaves signaling the change of seasons. She was, by all outward appearances, content and unaware of any dangers that might lurk in the day ahead. Neighbors caught glimpses of her bright presence. Some might have seen her from their windows, noting her energetic movements and the unmistakable aura of childhood innocence. Others simply heard the faint sound of laughter carried on the breeze. There was no alarm in the air, no reason to believe this day would be any different from the countless others that had come before. With the sun rising ever higher, the final piece of darkness vanished from the sky, and the day officially began. In that serene, untroubled morning, life felt predictable and safe. Yet beneath the surface, the hours were slipping away. Each moment, though it seemed ordinary, was bringing April closer to a fateful encounter. A dark horizon slowly creeping into view. No one sensed it yet, and there was still time for the usual joys of a bright new day. But the stage was set, and each gentle ray of light only served as a stark contrast to what would soon unfold. As the sun climbed higher, Machynlleth's rhythm settled into its familiar daytime pace. Shops opened their doors, local residents took short walks into town, and children like April ventured outdoors to play in the mild autumn weather. From an outside viewpoint, the day was unremarkable in its normalcy. No alarms, no frantic voices, just the comforting hum of daily life in a close-knit community. April's presence remained a bright spot amid the routine. She moved about with childlike enthusiasm, exploring corners and chatting wordlessly with the world around her. Though no actual conversation reached outside ears, her vivacious spirit was almost visible in her gestures and expressions. The neighborhood was used to seeing her at play, perhaps riding a small bicycle or engaging with friends in simple games. Adults passed by, offering kind smiles, unknowingly cherishing her innocence as a quiet constant in the backdrop of their own lives. Yet, as the hours ticked by, subtle shifts in the atmosphere began to hint at a change. The gentle breeze turned a little cooler, carrying with it the scent of damp leaves and the faint promise of rain. In the sky, a few thin clouds gathered, forming a pale veil that muted the sunlight. These were small signals that something was different, though nothing yet pointed to impending tragedy. It was simply a day in motion, each minute one step closer to a moment that no one could have predicted. As late afternoon slipped into early evening, shadows stretched across the streets, and the vibrant colors of day grew subdued. The air carried a deeper chill now, prompting many families to head indoors. A few lights began to flicker on in the windows, casting warm glows against the approaching dusk. Dinner preparations or end-of-day rituals might have begun in nearby homes, while children were gently reminded to wrap up their playtime. April was still outside, her small figure illuminated by the fading light. She was last seen in the area around her home, a comforting and familiar place. Neighbors occasionally glanced in her direction, seeing nothing out of the ordinary, simply a cheerful child who hadn't yet succumbed to the lure of warm blankets and bedtime stories. The clock was ticking toward an hour that would shift everything, yet there was no warning bell. From a distance, it was just a typical evening in a modest Welsh town. If anyone had paused to study the scene more carefully, they might have felt a subtle tension in the stillness, but most would have dismissed it as ordinary dusk settling in. The sun sank behind the hills, leaving only a gentle afterglow. In that fading light, April remained unsuspecting, and so did everyone around her, oblivious that these were precious final moments of a security soon to be shattered. Nightfall arrived, and with it came the moment when everything changed. In the space of a heartbeat, the quiet street turned from a place of refuge into a backdrop of sudden, unimaginable danger. Under the dim glow of streetlights, April's small silhouette vanished from public sight, swallowed by the darkness and an unknown presence that no one had anticipated. This was the instant when fate's fragile thread snapped, leaving only shock and confusion in their wake. Witness accounts hinted at a vehicle seen near the spot where April had been playing, an ominous detail that would soon take on far greater significance. Alarm rippled through the neighborhood as people began to realize she was missing, but the initial reaction was disbelief rather than outright panic. Searches started almost immediately, neighbors calling her name, checking familiar hiding spots, hoping it was just a misunderstanding. But the unsettling truth settled quickly. April was gone, and the night had become a maze of fear and questions. The reality of her sudden disappearance confronted everyone in that close-knit community, stirring a quiet terror that spread as swiftly as the darkness itself. In the distance, the soft wail of an emergency vehicle signaled an escalation no one ever wanted to experience. A sense of helplessness weighed heavily in the air, and the evening silence was replaced by frantic activity and whispered prayers for a safe return. The day's final act had revealed its devastating twist, and now the small Welsh town would never be the same again. When news of April Jones's disappearance broke, it radiated far beyond the borders of Machynlleth, gripping the entire nation. And soon, international headlines picked it up. Television broadcasts cut to images of search parties combing through fields, forests, and riverbanks under floodlights. Journalists stood on the edges of taped-off areas, reporting every known detail with somber urgency. For a moment, it felt as though the whole world paused, staring into the small Welsh town with collective concern. Local authorities initiated extensive searches, coordinating with volunteers who turned out in droves to help. Helicopters scanned the terrain from above, while divers prepared to explore nearby rivers. Photographs of April's smiling face were shared across social media platforms, accompanied by pleas for any information that could lead to her safe return. Speculations arose quickly. Some pointed to suspicious vehicles, others recalled vague sightings, yet no definitive answers emerged. In the midst of this media storm, the atmosphere in Machynlleth itself was surreal. Streets that once carried daily life now bustled with law enforcement and reporters. Camera flashes lit the darkness like frantic fireflies, and the hum of outside voices disrupted the town's customary peace. Families watched and waited, clinging to updates broadcast on local radio stations. Hope still lingered, but it stood on increasingly shaky ground. The sense of urgency was palpable, driven by the knowledge that every passing hour made resolution more elusive. A once quiet community now found itself under a glaring spotlight, consumed by a question that had no immediate answer. Where was April? Days turned into weeks, and the unresolved fate of April Jones became a solemn chapter in Wales's history, a tragedy that still echoes in the public consciousness. Investigations zeroed in on possible suspects, and forensic teams scoured every lead, but conclusive evidence remained stubbornly out of reach for a time. The final outcome, marked by an arrest and eventual conviction, provided a semblance of closure to some, but the heartbreak lingered, amplified by the fact that her remains were never fully recovered. In the aftermath, theories abounded. Some speculated about secret hideouts or hidden motives, while others crafted elaborate scenarios to explain how such a devastating event could unfold in a place so seemingly safe. Conspiracy whispers surfaced, suggesting multiple individuals involved or some grand scheme that authorities had overlooked. Yet with each new rumor, the question of absolute truth remained unanswered, as no explanation could ever truly ease the loss of a young life gone too soon. The community, once bound by neighborly ties, found itself bonded further by shared grief and a determination to ensure such a tragedy would never happen again. Tribute after tribute appeared. Pink ribbons on gates, flowers placed at local landmarks, and moments of silence to honor a little girl who had touched so many hearts in such a brief time. Though the legal outcomes and official statements provided a timeline and a name for the guilty, they could not fill the void left by April's absence. In the years that followed, debates persisted about the nature of evil and the vulnerability of innocence. People questioned what more could have been done, or if there had been any overlooked signs. Official reports offered details, times, places, even forensic data, but the emotional impact remained immeasurable. Even now, the mere mention of April's name in Machynlleth stirs a mix of sorrow and resolve, as if the town collectively carries a promise never to forget. And so the story ends with a community forever changed, and a world reminded of its fragility. The unthinkable can come calling when least expected, turning ordinary hours into the last moments of normalcy. In that silent pause, one might reflect on how easily the most familiar day can slip into the darkest night. Was it a random horror, or something carefully orchestrated by forces unseen? The final answer may be locked away, but the memory of April Jones lives on, a testament to the preciousness of every dawn and the unforeseen shadows that sometimes follow.